Today I want to walk you through some of the basics of working with clay because that's what we're going to be doing next. First, I'm going to give you a brief little tour of the corner of our room that really is dedicated to clay and clay building. For Art 1, we do mostly hand building, and when you get into intermediate Art 3D and ceramics classes, then you start doing more wheel throwing. And so I'll talk a little bit about where all those things are here. So first thing, over here, this is where all our tools are for clay. This shelf up here is what we call our slip shelf. It has all the different slips that we use. Slip is basically liquid clay. So it looks kind of like this. This one's a little bit dry. I'll add some water to it, but it's about the consistency of mayonnaise. Think of that. This is really the glue we use to put two pieces of clay together. Slip is literally just watered down clay. I take little scraps of clay, I add water to it, I mix it up with a mixer so it's really smooth, and then put it in here. So this is a little bit dried out. I would just add water to it and mix it up with a fettling knife and let it soak overnight, and then it'll be all ready to be used. We have 4 different kinds of slip right now. Actually 3, and then we will have a 4th one later. But you only need to worry about using these first 2. If you use red clay, which will be an option, you would use red slip. And they're all labeled with the word red on them. And also, I use clear containers so you can see. You use red slip with red clay, and then just regular slip with white clay. There also is raku clay and high fire clay, but we'll get to that in intermediate art. You don't really use those in Art 1 right now. Down below that, we have a lot of our tools, and they're all labeled. So your sgraffito tools, we don't use very much this semester, but we have needle tools, small loop tools, and medium loop tools. These are our loop tools that we use to kind of remove clay and to carve into surfaces. We have large loop tools. Fettling knives are these knives right here, which are great for cutting clay. They're not very sharp, but they make really nice clean cuts. We have wooden modeling tools, which do all sorts of things when you're smoothing out your clay and connecting pieces. And then we also have paddles. These paddles are going to be used mostly when we do our double pinch pads to form it, and you'll learn about that eventually. But paddles are great tools for clay. And then last are metal scrapers. Metal scrapers are great for smoothing out edges. I like them because they bend really easily. They're very agile like that. Here we have a whole bucket of sponges, elephant ear sponges that can be used. And also, these are actually blenders, but I love them as clay tools for like pushing clay around and manipulating the clay. Down below that we have our wheels. Now those wheels are not for throwing, they're only really for hand building if you need to be able to turn your piece really easily, or for more often, glazing. Okay, so speaking of glazing, I'm just going to turn this a little bit here. This is our glaze shelf. Okay, after you've looked at the test tiles to figure out what color glaze you want, you will be choosing your glaze from here. And we'll talk a lot more about glaze when we get to that point. Over here is our clay. Down at the bottom is where we have the white clay that you'll be using, and right above it is the red Sonoma red clay. The other kinds of clay, which we have raku and high fire, again, like I said, is for when you get into intermediate art and ceramics. This door right here, it's usually locked, opens up to our kiln. This is our kiln room. Right here we have the stilts that we use to put the shelves up. So here's a shelf sitting right there, you can see, and I'm going to show you. See, there is a shelf on there already with some stilts. This is where we stack the pieces in to be fired. All of our pieces get fired 2 times. They first get completely dried out, and then they get bisque fired. This is an example of a piece that has been bisque fired. It actually goes from being like a medium gray to being bright white like this. You can hear it ping. All the moisture has been moved out of this through the bisque firing process. When we fire our clay, we fire it at just under 1900 degrees for a bisque firing. That's a 0.5 cone, if you know anything about cones. But it gets up to 1890 degrees. After it has been bisque fired, that is when you will put the glaze on it. Now, we don't paint our clay, we glaze it. This is an example of something that has been glazed. Okay, the glaze has been painted on. It's just like a dull, powdery, it looks like powder paint almost. Once this gets fired, it changes into this. The glaze turns into almost a glass surface that actually makes your porous clay completely waterproof. This is how we can actually put like liquids into it and things like that. All right, now I'm back on the other side of the table in the middle of the room. And these are some other things that you're going to need to gather to work at your desk for this project, for all our clay projects. First, we have canvas covered boards. These are kind of like wedging boards. They're a lot like, they mimic our wedging table that we have over here, which I will talk about why we use canvas and things like that. This is what you would usually work on. The reason we work on this is because clay will just stick to the smooth surface of our tables like a suction cup. Next, we have rolling pins. There are enough rolling pins for everybody to have their own rolling pin. And also thickness sticks. At some point, we'll be doing projects, even our first project, where you're actually rolling clay out. And these sticks are all the same thickness. They actually help us keep our clay really consistent when we're rolling it out. Those are found in these tubes on either side, right here. We have, under the wedging table, some other things. Plastic bags are right here. We use plastic bags every time we store our clay. We have to know how to store our clay properly in order to keep it workable, especially since we have so much time between classes. Over here we have laminate boards. These boards are great for storing our clay to keep it really safe, because if we're picking it up and moving it, it's bending and changing shape. If we put it on a board overnight, it actually keeps its shape really. So this is our wedging table. This is where I do a lot of the work that I do. I'm going to talk to you about wedging your clay. When I first give you clay, you may need to wedge it. To wedge it, you use mostly the heels of your hand, and your fingers really just are only used to bring it back up. You push down, bring it up with your fingers. Push down with the heels, bring up with your fingers. We call this the ram's head wedging, and the reason is, let me get it a little bit further and I'll show you. As we wedge it, it starts to take on the appearance of a ram's head. So we've got the horns here and the snout right there, but the ram's horns on either side. But I'm never folding my clay into itself. I'm just pushing it down into itself. The reason we do this is because we need to eliminate any air bubbles that are in here. It also meshes our clay. If we're using recycled clay, which we do often, it really brings our clay together and incorporates it really nicely so it's very smooth and consistent. Now, can you over wedge something? Yes. The more you touch your clay and the more you work with your clay, the drier it will get. Sometimes this isn't a big deal, but if you're reworking your clay over and over again, if you're starting over like more than just once, your clay will start to really dry out and you're going to need to re-moisten it in order for it to really work for you and to be able to bend it without it cracking. If your clay starts cracking a lot, that means it's too dry for what you're trying to do at that moment with that clay. All right, speaking of dry clay, I want you to take a notice here of this sign that I have hanging in the room. It's right over here above the sinks, and it's basically a flow chart I want you to ask every time you're putting your clay away at the end of the hour. So, the first question, up there at the top, are you done? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, you're going to store it on the shelf in a bag with the bag open. The reason is because we want your clay to dry really slowly. The slower it dries, the stronger it will be, and the less likelihood you have of cracking. If your answer is no, then you need to decide, do you still need to bend and form the clay? Because you want different hardnesses of clay, whether you're bending it or whether you're just carving it. So if you don't need to bend it, you can go to no. But then the next question is, do you still want to carve into it or add other bits to it? If the answer is yes, then you have another question you need to ask yourself. Or if the answer is yes, then you have other things that you then need to decide if your answer is yes or no, and then kind of decide from there how you store your clay. So make sure every time at the end of the hour you look at this flow chart until you're used to the idea of how you need to store your clay. So there you go. I hope this was really helpful. When you come back, we're going to get started on clay right away. So it's important to me that you understand where to find things and how to use things in this classroom. If you have any questions, make sure you let me know.